The journey is conversations with ordinary people about stories of transformation and how we may have had setbacks in our life and how we persevered through those, how we've learned from those obstacles, and how they've maybe helped us on our path today. So, Nancy Enke, welcome to the journey.
Thank you.
And I know we've known each other and crossed paths a couple different times, and most recently we were at Cape Ryan Elementary School, and you were doing a demonstration there, and so we got to reconnect again.
Right.
And so, welcome to the journey. And let me just explain a little bit about what the journey's about. And the journey is just capturing conversations with ordinary people, maybe doing some extraordinary things. In the process of their life, they maybe have had some obstacles in which they have learned and maybe failed forward from or transformed their lives. Could be anything from, for some individuals, it was addiction that they overcame, mental illness, someone in their life may have died from suicide, or maybe just changed their life, found what God created them to be and started walking that path. And I know you have your own story there. But maybe before we jump into all that, if you could just maybe share a little bit for our audience of what do you do for fun?
You know what we do for fun? We dance.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes, we took, my husband and I took about a year of ballroom dancing.
Okay.
We love dancing.
Nice.
We're not that great at it.
Sure, yeah.
But we love it. And so we don't get out a lot to dance. It's just finding a place that we really like, and it's kind of hard around here to find more of a ballroom type dance place. But that's one of the things we do mostly for fun is dance. And then the other thing that probably tops the list is spending time with family and grandkids, because we have 12 of them.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So we love doing things with grandkids. So that's really fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
So first, your husband's name?
Doug.
Doug, okay. And you and Doug have been together for how long?
Well, we will have 49 years this summer.
Really? Congratulations.
Yes, thanks.
So married 49 years or together 49 years?
49 years married.
Married, okay. And then how long did you know each other?
We only knew each other about a year before we got married.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've been together for 50 years.
We really have.
And 49 years is the anniversary. Well, congratulations. And you have 4 kids, right?
4 kids.
Okay.
Yes.
And what are their names and roughly how old are they?
We have our daughter Sarah.
Okay.
And she is 46.
Okay.
I have to think about that now. And then we have twin boys who are 44.
Okay.
And then our youngest son, their twins are Jason and Jeremy. And then our youngest son Ryan is 42. Okay. So they kept me busy for a while.
Like every 2 years.
Exactly. Except for the 2 in the middle, 7 minutes.
Yeah, 7. Yes, exactly. So, okay, and then so Doug obviously worked outside the home.
He did. He's an engineer.
He's an engineer. Okay, and who did he work for?
He spent 40 plus years at Sunstrand.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Yeah.
What department was he in?
He was in quality engineering.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I spent some time out there in the early 2000s, helping out with a safety program that I created.
Oh, okay.
And Steve Sipe and I had created a program, and we worked with first of his facilities engineering and manufacturing for helping cultural development regarding all the concerns around safety as a whole. And then we went into a handful of other organizations as well. So so I always spending that much time. It was about 3 years to roll that initial program out.
Okay.
And then I would come back and work with different business units. So there's definitely a fondness of.
Well, he spent pretty much his whole career there, and then I don't know, when he was about 65, they had a buyout package to retire, which he took, and he retired for the summer.
Okay.
And then he said, "Oh, this isn't working for me." So now he's full-time at Woodward.
Oh, did he really?
He did. He spent about a year at Bergstrom, and then we moved to Roscoe, and so it was a little far. And so now he is at Woodward.
Oh, okay.
And he's not really thinking of retiring yet.
Interesting. So, are you from the Rockford area? area?
I was born and raised in Rochelle, so not too far away, about 30 miles south. So raised on a farm there with 2 older brothers.
Okay. And in a farm, meaning that's what your
My dad was a farmer for Del Monte, so he didn't own the farm, but he worked that farm and other farms in the area. So I had a true farm life.
Sure. Okay.
But I was the only girl, so I didn't. I was my dad's favorite. My brothers don't know that, but
yeah, or maybe they do, and then
maybe they do. Yeah.
So he was a crop farmer.
He was.
Okay, and I spent some time with my uncle down in southern Indiana, who was a dairy farmer, and that was an interesting. I remember that was a very interesting experience. And then my other uncles in southern Wisconsin had very small, 75-acre type, small operations, but and then they would work full time at another job and and farm that. And so, but dairy farming, I remember going down and helping a handful of times, and that was an interesting experience.
Yeah, my uncle, who lived not too far from us, he was a dairy farmer. Okay. So we had the full farm experience, And
I have a couple farm families that are clients, and that is it's a lifestyle. It is, and you have to appreciate and understand that when you marry into that.
The wife, my mom, she worked as hard as my dad, just in a different way.
Yeah, it's a balance. You have to. All the parts have to be moving together, right?
That is very true. Very true.
So I know we were talking earlier. You went to graduate from Rochelle High School.
I did.
And then you had mentioned then right out of high school you had aspirations to be a hairstylist.
I did. I went to Milwaukee to school, and which for my parent, I'm really surprised now. My parents let me go. They let their baby girl go to the big city, and I really had fun with that. I did, back then, you only had to go like about 9 months. It was $1,200 or something like that. And then I worked in a salon in Milwaukee and did that for a couple of years. And then I met my husband in Milwaukee. And then we were married, and then we moved to Schaumburg in Hoffman Estates, and I did hair there. So continued that for many years, and then once I had my children, our first daughter, I was very committed to staying at home. That was just something I wanted to do, and so that's what I did then for the next. I don't know how many years, but I stayed home. Did that. Yeah.
And then, so what was? Because I'm always interested. I've been involved with a different local play that's going to be involved on new moms, and it's called Cry It Out, and the artist ensemble is going to be doing that, and it should be. I think it'll be coming out in March, but I'm always interested in that aspect. So going from a career that you went to school for and was involved with it for at least
a couple, 2 or 3 years.
And a couple different places, a couple different salons you worked at, and then going into being a mom full time and a housewife full time.
Right.
So what was that transition like?
That was an easy transition for me. Actually, because I just loved being a mom. I loved being a wife, but I wasn't the traditional. My mom was up at whatever time in the morning making breakfast for my dad and, all that kind of stuff. And I was definitely not that wife. So I did not get up and make breakfast, So, but, my kids, of course, I did and all that. But, I didn't mind that transition at all. That was some of the best times of my life, being a mom, and I just loved it. And so I didn't find that transition hard to go from career to just stay-at-home mom. Frustrating, very frustrating at times, especially with, the number of kids, the 4 I had, and the twins together. And there were days that I remember specifically with the twins. They were both crying and I couldn't calm them. And my 2-year-old, she was doing okay, but I just called up my husband. I said, "You need to come home. I can't do this anymore." And fortunately, he came home at lunchtime and he kind of calmed everybody. And then I was okay. So it wasn't always easy. And even though I've been through it and got through it, I'm telling you, I think being a mom is the hardest job ever.
Sure.
You have so much to balance. And it's not only the physical work of it, it's that emotional, because you don't know if you're doing a good job or not.
Yes.
You don't know.
Yeah.
And that is really hard because you want to do a really great job. You want to raise these kids who have good self-esteem and feel very loved and all that kind of stuff. And you don't get a book with them. So you kind of only do what you know to do based on how you were raised. And I mean, I was really blessed. I had great parents, and my mom, always spent time with me in that. So, I had a good role model, but I do really appreciate not everybody had a good role model. And you got to kind of learn this as you go. Yeah. And so I've always said, it's the hardest job. You're raising another human being, to send out into the world, and you don't know if you're doing it right, so you just got to do the best you can.
Well, I think that speaks volumes on so many different levels, and just from the element of it being 24/7, right, and like I know for me as a counselor, every hour I see someone different, right. So it varies, it changes, right, and so but when you're stay at home, when you're a full-time mom and you're the primary caretaker, there is, and then in your case it was 4, all within 6 years, right?
Well, probably 4, because our daughter was born in 74, and then our twins in 76, and our last one in 78. So
wow, okay.
So we got 4 and 4.
Yeah. So I do think, I know, just thinking about my wife had the opportunity when my son was born to stop working outside the home in her career and just focus on raising our son and daughter. And that, I know that was, she talks so very much like yourself, that it wasn't always easy, but it was something that she was very grateful that she did. Now, my son will be 24 this week, and my daughter is 21. And it seems like a completely different world,
right?
And so with that, so your children growing up, and they do the college thing or move out of the house and all that, and so now Nancy goes back to doing hair.
I did not go back to doing hair after there was a little bit of empty nest syndrome there when the last one, because I'm trying to think, all 3 of them went away, except for our daughter. She lived at home. She went to Rock Valley, and then
that's your oldest.
That's my oldest, and then she went to St. Anthony's School of Nursing. So she pretty much lived at home most of that time. She had a couple times she lived in an apartment with a friend, but so once she was married, and then the boys were in college, and then they all got married. I wasn't sure then, well, what do I do now? Because I didn't have that focus. But then it wasn't too long after our daughter was married, then they had a child, and so I did a lot of babysitting, and so the younger grandkids, I really enjoyed that. They kept me busy. So I really didn't do anything for a long time. I mean, in between there, while they weren't all gone from school, but I think I told you I had my little DJ thing going.
Yes.
And so that was totally fun, and then it wasn't probably. There's that transition where it's kind of interesting. You get your children all raised and launched, and they're all doing well. Then it was at that time that I've got aging parents now that I'm dealing with. And that's like a whole nother, story. My mother had kidney failure, so she was in dialysis. Oh, yeah. And So I did, even though they lived in Rochelle, I still did a lot of helping and taking care of, with that. And so that kind of consumed a lot of my time. But in between that is when I got into the yoga, and mostly because I needed stress release, and that was my main reason. So that was kind of where I went with that for quite a while, just kind of taking yoga and just getting de-stressed and trying to cope with, in some ways caring for aging parents, even though they didn't live with me, but you're almost on call all the time. My mom had a lot of doctor visits, and she was in and out of the hospital and that type of thing. So I was then kind of refocused. I've always been, I really think I've always been a nurturer, and so it was from my kids, and then I kind of was taking care of my parents, and at some point, then when my mom passed, then I really helped take care of my dad a lot too, But I still had my yoga throughout all of that.
And at that time, though, the yoga was, you were participating in yoga.
Participating, yeah.
And when you first started doing yoga, what was it about yoga different than, so this was about 25 years ago?
Actually, give or take, that I'm trying to think. I really started teaching when I was 55, and I had been taking yoga maybe off and on a little bit for about 5 years before that.
So late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah. And it wasn't really mainstream quite. I mean, it was, but it wasn't. There wasn't a lot of it here in town. My first class was actually at Rock Valley. A friend invited me. She goes, "Oh, come and take this." I'm like, "Okay," and I liked it. And what attracted me to yoga was the deeper spiritual part of it is what I really am like, there's more to life than what I'm seeing, And so I liked that aspect of yoga, of going inward more than I loved running. We did a lot of running when we didn't really start that until we were in our 40s either, because all our boys were in cross country, and our youngest son, he also lived at home for Rock Valley, and then he went to medical school and that sort of thing. But him and his girlfriend at the time, who's now his wife, they encouraged us to run, and they made us accountable.
Okay.
And no matter what the weather, we were out running. Sure. And I did really love it. That was fun. And I like that physical exercise of running. Sure. But it doesn't give you what I was looking for, something inward. Yeah. And yoga really, because it was quiet and it felt physically good on the body, and it's no struggle, And I just like that time where you go inward. Sure. That was the big attraction to yoga, because I think when you get to your 40s, you start thinking the body starts to betray you a little bit at 40, and you start rethinking your life a little bit, and I think that's why yoga was what resonated with me.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so the first yoga class you took was one of those adult education classes at Rock Valley. Okay. Yep. And then, and did you then right from there start finding a place to take class?
I didn't right away. I just kind of liked it. We did the 6 weeks thing, and then I started looking around, where can I take yoga? And honestly, there wasn't a lot of choices for places to take yoga. I mean, there was some, but I wasn't internet savvy at that time, and it wasn't a big deal back then
and actually, at this time, early 90s, there was no internet, right?
That's true. Yeah. I mean, that's true, because you're right.
And I remember,
we're so used to it now.
It was the old yellow pages. And,
that's right, yes.
And I remember at that time period is when I was I graduated from college in 1990, and coming back to Rockford, and starting getting in about a year later or so, started getting into, working as a counselor and stuff, and working with ATEP and doing men's work, and I was doing a lot of Native American studies.
Right.
And there was, and if you remember the phrase New Age, and there was this essence that yoga was getting put into that New Age aspect. I don't, and that, at least that was my exposure and experience. So.
And it was, and there's still a little bit of that now. People think, I don't know, it's like yoga, it's a religion, and all that. But for me, I found Lady Wellness, which is no longer in business, but they had yoga there, and it was a women's only health club, and that really appealed to me. And so they had. Trying to think who the yoga teacher. Oh, actually, the yoga teacher at that time, which is interesting because this would have been in around 1990. It was the same guy that I took yoga from at Rock Valley.
Oh, really?
And he was the only yoga teacher at this all women's health club. But I liked his style, and I was fine with that. And then. So I joined there. I kind of came in because at 40 I was starting to gain a little weight, and like you say, the body is starting. You're noticing. Now I'm like, oh, I could go back to 40 in a heartbeat now. But and I just felt like I needed something in my life, and I wanted that routine, and I wanted, I got a personal trainer and all that, and because you're starting to question yourself a little bit, okay, is this it, and all that, and so I took the yoga, loved it. I went, like 3 times a week, I think, for that, and then another younger girl came in, and she started teaching, and I really liked her style too, and this little light went off, like, could I do this? But by this time I'm 54.
Okay.
And I so remember thinking, well, I'm just way too old to do this.
Regarding becoming an instructor.
Becoming an instructor. Okay. And I had never done anything quite like that, and there was that moment of like, well, can I? And I taught, and the younger woman who was teaching, she was probably like mid-20s maybe, and her name was Mally, and I just loved her. And I said, I don't know. I said, how did you get trained? How did you do this? Because there were many avenues to become a yoga teacher, And then she said, I went to this Yoga Fit, which, is an international, training thing now. And she gave me the information, and I do remember because I was 54, so it would have been in 1994. We did have a computer, a dial-up.
Sure, yes, yeah.
Connection. And I knew very little about this computer stuff, and I so remember going downstairs, because we had it down in the lower level, and I'm trying to figure this out and get online and find out about this Yoga Fit, and I again feeling like, oh, this is silly. I mean, I'm 55 years old. People don't do this when they're 55, And so I got the information, and I can't remember exactly if I made a phone call or made the contact, but I found out where the next training was. And there was one in, I believe it was Racine at the time. And I'm like, I'm going to do this. And I and even back then, I mean, it was, wasn't terribly expensive, but we still didn't have tons of money.
Sure.
And so I made the call or whatever I did, and I got signed up for this training, and it was a 2-day type, you have about 16, 18 hours, and then you don't get certified because you got to go out and do your teaching and then get certified. And I remember being too scared to even go there by myself. So my husband drove me, and we stayed in Racine for the whole weekend because I was that intimidated. I didn't, well, and it's still this way, it drives me nuts, but, from from my generation, if the husband and the wife are going somewhere, the only person who drives is the husband. Like, why? I watch my kids and like, do you want to drive? You want to drive? They take turns. But in my generation,
Sure.
If you are going together as a couple, the husband drives, just the way it is.
My parents are 75.
So it's the same age group, yeah.
And my dad has been wheelchair bound for 7 years and still drives them.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Now, he can't go anywhere without my mom because of the wheelchair,
right.
but he still drives.
That's how it was. So my husband had to drive me up to Racine and stay. And I went through it, but I remember the same thing. It's like I was the oldest person in the class. Everybody was young. And so it was really a struggle for me to be stepping, in my opinion, that far out of my box, meaning age group wise. I was very intimidated. I was very insecure about the whole thing. And I made it through. But
And what do you think, looking back? I mean, because I was, a handful of years ago, and obviously many, many hours later of doing yoga, what do you think of that younger Nancy? What was she afraid of?
I was afraid of failure. Like, would I be good enough? Could I teach? Could I effectively, present myself as a teacher at 55? I think it was the age thing, but it was also it was an insecurity of doing something I'd never done before to portray myself as the expert in the yoga. That was a little intimidating for me. That was really intimidating.
So the vulnerability,
yes, very much,
it was around stepping out of your comfort zone,
right?
And then the chatter in your head that was talking to you about why you were out of your comfort, why this was the easy one was the fact that you were age difference.
That was the big thing, the age difference, because I felt like, I maybe thought like I was stepping out of my place. That because none of my friends were doing anything like this. They were very settled into their lifestyle, so to speak. Their children were growing like mine, and give or take, and like maybe I wasn't supposed to be stepping out of that I had a role to play, and maybe I was stepping too far out of where I was supposed to be.
But you were this little Rochelle girl who ventured off to Milwaukee.
Right, exactly.
To be a hairstylist.
Right.
Why was this different than that?
I had a certain sense of rebellion back then, meaning, I was a good kid, but still that thing of like, well, I always wanted to not do, I love the farm life, I love but that's not what I wanted in my life, and I can see it now as I age. My mom was the same way. Like, she didn't think she could quite, and I always tell this story a lot, like maybe about a year before she passed, she had said to me, she's like, what are people going to write about me in my obituary? She goes, I didn't do anything. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table with her, and I said, Mom, please, do you know what you did? Look at the children you raised, the home you made. My mom was just such a good person. She took care of so many people. She was the first one there to cook or bake for someone if they needed it. And she didn't have any credentials. My mom and my dad both. They didn't even have high school educations. But they were such good people, and they were students of life, so to speak. They learned in that way. And I think, but I did get that definitely from my mom about, well, just stay in your place. Just stay in your place. And I never saw it as a bad thing, but But I think I was always like, well, why can't I do that?
Right. Well, you were telling a story earlier when you did some DJing. You were told at that time, and that was in, you said, the late 80s.
That would have been mid-'80s.
Mid-'80s, and you were told that women don't DJ.
That's right.
And similar to maybe 15 years earlier,
right.
You had maybe a little chip on your shoulder, and that you were going to show them, right?
I think that is true.
Okay.
That is very, very true.
And so now, if we, fast forward, right, from your mid-30s when you took this part-time gig of DJing, right, and that could be intimidating because, that's why they're coming there, meaning all these patrons are coming there to dance to music and of course dancing anyways, but are they going to like what I'm playing?
Right.
Now, granted, you get a little bit of help, with what's popular and things like that, but this is still, both of those situations were different than putting yourself out there at 54, 55 to be trained as a yoga instructor.
Right.
And we talked about vulnerability, but this is a different kind of vulnerability.
It is.
What was different about this vulnerability?
With like the DJing and all that, that was intimidating. That was a learning process, but there was a real system to that as far as how you keep the dance floor. And the person who trained me, who said I couldn't do it, who is actually a very good friend of mine now, and I remind him of that, and he's like, "Oh, I never said that." I'm like, "Yeah, you did." But there was a system, and you just had to learn the system, how the beats per minute for the song, and how you start the dance floor, and you never let the dance floor leave. So there was a system, and we had the playlist and that. So that I could do, and that was fun. But it wasn't deep. It was fluffy. DJing was fluffy for me at that time. But the whole yoga thing, it was like, because it was so deep and spiritual, I didn't want to fail at that. That's what I didn't want to fail at. I didn't want to fail myself, but I didn't want to fail others too. I felt like I really need to be able to offer something to people, And I remember when I finished the training, I actually started crying because I felt so like I did this. I don't think I had, and that's the greatest thing I'm finding as age and maturity come into my life here. So much more confidence and realizing that everything is not as serious as you think it is, and to just let yourself try stuff and see what happens, we all have our struggles and it doesn't matter. Sometimes it's emotional. Probably the big struggle I went through when I lost my mom, I think I had just gotten certified to teach like in the fall of 2004, so I was 54. And then in April, that following April, my mom actually passed away, and she didn't get the whole yoga thing. Like what, And now I think like, oh, if I could have a little more time with my mom, I know I could have my mom in a yoga class with me. I just know it. She would have been okay with it. But at first, same thing. She didn't know what it was. Like whatever, and I would just laugh. My dad, he'd go, "Oh, how's that yogurt business going?" And I would laugh. He always called it yogurt, And but then when my mom passed, I was not expecting the grief that hit me. I lived my life thinking, I'd seen grandparents pass, and I had lost my brother to cancer at 45, so he was really young. And that was very difficult for the whole family. But I thought, well, your parents get old. My mom was 80, and you're going to lose your parents. And in her case, we knew with the dialysis, she wasn't going to be 90 or 100. And the first 6 months, I handled it just fine, and I took care of my dad and all that. And then it just like struck me, and I just fell into a very deep depression with that, where I just like, I actually quit teaching. I was teaching there at Lady Waldis, and I said, I can't handle it. I just can't do it. And so I quit completely. I didn't do anything, and I just like stayed home. And I really was depressed, and I missed my mom so much. And I didn't see that happening. I did not ever expect it.
Okay.
I thought I had it under control. I knew I would miss my mom, but I'm like, well, parents die when they get old, And so I thought it was going to be just part of life, and it wasn't going to affect me that much. And it was unbelievable how much it affected me.
Sure.
And I just literally did nothing. I stayed home, and I didn't want to leave the house, didn't want to do things. I would do things, but I didn't really want to.
Yeah.
And it was that type of thing where I'm kind of laying on the couch all day watching TV, and then I wouldn't want my husband to know that that's what I had done all day. I hadn't even gotten dressed. And so I would hurry up and get dressed before he was going to come home from work, like, oh, yeah, oh, what'd you do today? Oh, not much, But I didn't want people to know that I was that depressed, because I thought, I should have been stronger than that. I thought I should have been stronger to handle it. And I had good rapport with my kids and stuff, and one of my boys, especially Jeremy, he would call on the phone, and he'd just say, well, how are you doing today? And I would talk to him more than I did actually my husband about it. And one day he said to me, he goes, Mom, what are you doing? You have a whole life to live. You've got kids, you've got grandkids, what are you doing? And that was kind of like a moment for me. And so I started just making myself get dressed and leave the house every day, even if it was just go through the drive-through and get my Diet Pepsi.
Sure.
That's what I did. And gradually I got out more and more and more. And then, I do believe that circumstances, I think things happen for a reason. And I got a phone call from my former boss at Lady Waldis, and she goes, would you come back and just teach one class a week? And I said, I think I'm ready for that. And I did. And then, in a month or two, I was teaching, 5 or 6.
Sure.
And so my son said what he said to me, and then I got the phone call to come back, and it's like everything just started coming back together.
Okay. Looking back on that time period, and then your dad passed how many years later?
My dad passed about 9 years later, so I had a long time in there with him.
And so what do you, if there was, and I know it's complex, so I know that's potentially more than one thing, but if you, looking back on it now, what do you think? You were surprised that it was more than just a milestone in your life, and I think grieving is a natural process of life and death, right?
Right.
And it's just a natural process of life, and the natural process of life is death happens, and then sometimes we are surprised. I'm going to use this word, and I don't know if it's 100% the best descriptor, but sometimes we get stuck in it.
Right.
And it's hard to differentiate between, did I get stuck in it, or did I just take that long to work through that part of the process?
Right.
And so, because the other element that was going on with you was that, once again, very similar to when you had the empty nest syndrome, there was this time period where you became your mom's primary caretaker, while you were still trying to do life back up here in Rockford. And that's at least a 45-minute drive, right? And so you got the drive back and forth. You had the time spent, the hospital, all the different caretaking aspects of it, and now that's all done.
Right. Yeah.
and that wasn't completely done because your dad was still alive.
He was, but my dad was, at that time, he was 81, and he was still mowing the golf course. He was still working, taking care of his own home. So my primary care with him was like on Sundays. We went every Sunday. He didn't, being the farm guy, he didn't know how to cook. So I would make all his meals for the week and freeze them and do that, all that kind of stuff. And so, he was pretty self-sufficient then, so he just, needed us to come down and visit with him, and we'd spend all day Sunday. But we had done that with my mom, too. We've always done that with my parents. But, yeah, it was that idea. I remember one of my first feelings after my mom passed was, I even though I saw my dad, it was like, well, I'm an orphan. I felt like an orphan, like I had, even though I still had my dad, but at that time I was really, really close to my mom and my dad, but not the same. It was me and my mom. And, there was a really blessing in the way that it happened because I had 9 years that I was like, I got to talk to my dad more. Primarily, I talked to my mom the most on Sundays and things like that, and, just girl talk. But I got to know my dad in different ways. And ultimately, my dad ended up with dementia and was in memory care. But, it was that sense of like, I don't have a mom anymore. And I just seriously did not see that coming. I'm like, well, I'm 55, I love my mom, but I don't need a mom at this age. And it was like, but I did, It's just a strange thing,
Yeah. And I can see how that can happen, and sometimes it may not happen because people are so busy, and distracted and, and all that. But interesting, oddly enough, right, one of the things that yoga does is it slows things down.
It does.
Right. And in the midst of slowing things down, there is then a much greater possibility that you're going to feel things that if you were distracted.
True.
Right. And sometimes those feelings of things can be, this past weekend, we went on, we were up at our lake home and we went for a hike, took my nephew and his wife's puppy, and with my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, we went for a walk when my wife was with us, and went for a walk. It was a beautiful day, just absolutely beautiful day. And there's an awareness that happens, so that was a great experiencing that, right, and savoring that. But if you have the ability to have that kind of awareness, then you're also going to have the awareness of pain and loss too. And because it doesn't differentiate, you don't only get the good stuff. Right? You don't only only joy, right? And so you're going to feel sadness at a deeper level. You're going to feel, and you can experience fear and experience obviously anger and injustice, and so that's all an aspect of it. So maybe that played a part in that.
Right. It probably did, because, the other thing when I first got, before I was teaching, but just taking yoga, and I tell this story a lot to, my students, my kids, they were older by then, but they still had, I think Ryan might have still been, I can't even keep the date straight, but, they were well past teenagers. And they said, oh, you seem different. And I'm like, different how? And they're like, you're not as... picky about things, and that they said you seem calmer about stuff, and that was the first time it struck me. It's like, oh, it must be that yoga thing I'm doing, because I could get, and even now, the longer, having taught yoga now, going on 16 years, I still, get bent out of shape about things, but. Sure. I don't hold on to that much anymore. I don't have that many grudges. Used to I could hold on to grudges for a long time. Sure. But yoga just lets me just just let things pass and let things be. Just let them be, and know when to pick those battles that need to be, dealt with, and when to just let it go,
Well, that's, if you could, maybe just for our audience, because I think everyone listening will know about yoga, but many people, myself included, I know that there are different types of yoga and different styles of yoga, but I don't really think I really know much about what are the different styles, and so if you could kind of just maybe educate us a little bit about.
There are many different. There's 8 limbs of yoga, and there's like 8 different styles, and so basically you have your hatha yoga, and that's basically what I teach, and that involves your mind, body, spirit. So connecting those 3 in really good balance, and then there are all different kinds, and too many to go into as far as you can have a more physical aspect of the yoga, and basically all the yogas are going to come down to that. Either it's going to be more focused on the physical or more focused on the spiritual, or combining the different styles. And now there's a lot of trendy yoga right now.
Sure.
There is spear in yoga, there's goats in yoga, there's a new trend right now, which really, I don't get this, but there's rage yoga.
Rage.
Have you heard of rage? There is something called rage yoga. There's naked yoga. I mean, because yoga has become very popular and commercialized, a lot of people are just taking something and attaching yoga to it, and it's a moneymaker, and it's fine. It's just not where I go with that. But rage yoga, now that's probably the oddest one that I can't quite connect with. Like, why would you want to? It involves drinking, swearing, yelling if necessary during your yoga practice. Like, well, I'm not quite sure how that works, but it's out there. And you know what? For some people, maybe that works for them. I can't connect it to yoga anywhere that I can connect, like drinking beer while, maybe after or before, but not while I'm doing yoga. Do I want to be drinking a beer? And I have taught puppy yoga. I've not done goat yoga, but I've done a puppy yoga class for a fundraiser. But I let people know, no, we're not seriously doing yoga here. But the puppies are cute, and they're, you can pet them, and they are calming. So, you can it's not that you can't combine yoga with other things, but you have to know the difference between, is it just kind of fun and frivolous, with puppies, goats, all that. You get things from it. But if you're really working inwardly with the whole spiritual part of yoga, then you don't want to be distracted with, goats and puppies and and all that other stuff,
It sounds like distractions.
It is distractions, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's fun. No. It's fun, but you have to know what's
the intent.
But the type of yoga. I mean, I really just, for me personally, I kind of teach the one style, and I teach the mind body. Spirit, so that we are working our physical body, we're appreciating. That's the other thing. What I like about yoga for a lot of people, and for myself included, it is non-judgmental. You can come into that class, and you don't have to feel judged, like, oh, well, they're more stretchy than me, or, oh, they have, Lululemon pants and I don't, It doesn't, and if anybody's doing yoga in that manner, they're missing the whole point of it. They're really missing the point, because it's really, you're in a group setting, yes, and, people are going to notice other people, but there is just, when you're in a true state of yoga, in a class, I mean, people, they're very friendly with other people, but it's so non-judgmental. And that's what I like about it. And like in the way I teach, I always have a lesson. I use different books, and we have a lesson, a life lesson that you can take home with you from class.
And like a daily reflection.
Yeah, like a daily reflection that is usable in your everyday life. So I always do that and then refer to it at the end. And we always have a relaxation at the end where we just kind of calm and center and balance and see what we can take with us. And I think that is one of the differences with yoga as opposed to like a workout, which I always believe in this. People say, "Oh, I love my yoga. I don't do anything else." But it's like, well, yoga is great, but I am a firm believer that you have to get your stretching, you have to get your strength training, and you have to get your cardio. If you want an all-around healthy life, you've got to do all three of those.
Sure.
And you can stretch without yoga. That's fine. But I just kind of feel, physically you have to do those three things, and of course, good nutrition and all the other stuff that goes with it. Right. But yoga helps you like just de-stress because, this world we live in now, we have things beeping at us all the time, and we're connected to phones. And yoga is where your phone is gone; it's not there, and you get to just like be with yourself.
Right.
And we don't spend very much time with ourselves anymore. We really don't. Yeah. We are so attached, myself included, to all these electronics, and we're busy checking our Facebook and all that. And again, good thing. But it can get out of hand, and yoga helps bring you back to yourself,
And when and again, just from your perspective for the people listening, you referred multiple times to spiritual,
right?
And obviously, some people can have developed spiritual practices from a religious teachings,
right?
And then other individuals may have developed spiritual practices and spiritual exercises that may not be appearing to be tied to a religious practice,
right? Well, with yoga, that is one of the things people often think that it's part of a religion, and of course Buddha is, part of it because, yoga originated in India, and that's where it all started. And going back to the men thing, women were not allowed to practice yoga in the early beginnings of yoga. Obviously, it was something that was handed down from, one male, say a father to a son or whatever, and it was truly more spiritual. The early beginnings of yoga were not about the physical postures as much. That kind of came later. So it really wasn't practiced by women at all until it came to the United States. And then it, became more mainstream. And of course it changed a lot too. But this idea of the spiritual, it does not have to be a religion in any way. That is just not important. And typically in yoga, they refer to the divine. So your divine can be what? It can be God, it can be Buddha, it can be whatever it is to you. So it doesn't teach a religion. It just helps you to recognize that you have a divine within you, whatever you call that. And for me, the whole spiritual thing is like being one with the whole universe, that sort of thing, and knowing that there's something bigger than me. I'm not in this alone. Right. And that's just my total belief that there is a higher power. My personal one happens to be God, but we don't ever preach that in our classes. I know my classes well enough to know where I can go with it. I've taught before where someone has said, I don't like that you were mentioning the divine. They don't want that mentioned at all. That's a little more of the exception than the rule. So I'm always aware of, my class and who is in it and what is acceptable to them. So it's really individual for the person, and you don't have to be a believer to practice yoga. You don't have to be.
Well, and I think it's an interesting aspect. So I got a couple things when you were just talking about what you just said, and I'll go with this one thought right now is that it is always interesting. On one end we have somebody that may be coming in and be offended if you said the divine because it doesn't fit their paradigm of their religion, and so they'll be offended and on guard and defensive, and if it isn't blank, then everyone hears then it's wrong. And then on the other end of the continuum, no, I guess it's the same end, just framed differently, right? Is the idea that I'm offended because you mentioned the word divine, which is interesting, right? Because that probably has to do with that individual. And maybe the other 15 people in the class, it doesn't affect them that way, but that particular person wants their viewpoint to be imposed on everyone else, versus looking within them about why is this bringing up energy, right?
Exactly.
And so it's an interesting thing, right? And I guess the other end of the continuum, could be that extreme is, I don't think about anything, so then I think about just me, and so there's no connection with anything greater than myself, because I don't look beyond the capacity of just what's in front of me, right?
Exactly.
And I think kind of going back to what you had said about this idea of slowing down. I know for me, having been a power lifter and a bodybuilder and contact sports, and everything was, when I was lifting weights, everything was about resistance to actually shorten the muscle, for the muscle to be stronger, and in a bodybuilding case, bigger, right? And now with some of the things that I'm doing as I've gotten older, late 40s, early 50s, is about elongating and stretching and elongating, and finding out just recently that I was, I've improved on my stretching.
Oh, good.
Because I was stretching like, I've been stretching now for the last few years because I hadn't stretched for a decade and a half, 2 decades or whatever, but I was finding out that I was stretching like I was lifting weights aggressively. And so there wasn't a flow. There wasn't a long, I wasn't really stretching as much as I was attacking the muscle. And so that has been a huge difference for me, and just from a mindset of that, and doing some of my resistance training differently than I was before. And so that has been, has changed everything from how I'm standing to how I'm walking to, there's been a lot of changes.
And one of the things yoga does too is the posture, our posture, and that, there's so much with yoga. The breath, learning to use our breath is such a powerful tool to help us calm and relax, and learning how to really breathe properly. So we're really using all of our lungs instead of that shallow breath. So, just those little things, they often say that you don't work at yoga, you let yoga work at you. And that's really how it is. It's just kind of, maybe you'll learn the breath first, and you'll just learn to calm with the breath. Or maybe, the more A-type personalities tend to not like yoga because it's too slow. And they probably need it the most in some ways. But that's okay. I always tell people too, if you try yoga and you don't like yoga, that's okay. do something else. Just find something you like that you will be consistent at. Or if you try a yoga class and either you didn't care for the teacher or you didn't care for the style of the yoga, look around. Try a different teacher. Try a different style, because everybody's got to find the one that resonates with you, or else you're not going to do it, And so I think with yoga, we're so fortunate because we have so many possibilities. And hey, if Rage Yoga helps make you a better person, why not? It just doesn't matter what style you do as long as you find the one that works for you and that adds to your life. I mean, if you're doing anything and putting energy and effort into it and it's not adding much value to your life, you probably should just stop doing it and find something else.
Sometimes, and I know in my case, I will go through cycles where I do something and then I stay too long. And even though I get signals that it's time for me to move on, my success in different areas of my life have come because I have stayed the stick-to-itiveness and pushed through the distractions. And then I've also recognized that there is a time when I need to let go and move on to the next phase. And that's sometimes easier said than done, but
definitely. And I'm finding this whole aging thing, like nearing 70. There's this. I'm in a little bit in conflict, like. Shouldn't I be slowing down and relaxing in my life and doing more things we didn't have time to do, say with my husband retiring. But then it's like this timeline, it's like, I don't have the rest of my life. It's getting shorter and shorter. And I have so much I want to do yet. How am I going to get this all done? It's almost like another conflict in my life at this point of but I have so much I want to do yet. And oh gosh, I wish I would have started yoga when I was in my 20s instead of in my 50s. So balancing life with the aging thing that's a whole nother show.
Exactly. It is, and I think that that idea of 60 seconds is 60 seconds, no matter if I'm focusing on the 60 seconds or I think the 60 seconds is going forever or I think it's flying by. The clock doesn't really care. It's the same seconds that make up the minute, right?
Yes.
But sometimes we can savor it and sometimes we didn't notice it at all. So Nancy, thank you very much for being on the show.
Oh my gosh, I so enjoyed it.
And thank you for sharing your story about the experiences of being feisty, being Daddy's favorite, and venturing out. And then at the same time, when you knew when you went to go get certified, and that there was this real coming into the second career and the second part of life, that you may have been finding what exactly you were being called to all along.
I think so.
So, Nancy, if there was anything that you'd want to share with the audience, what would you want to share?
You know what? From my experience here in life, it would be don't let fear hold you back from doing anything, even if you've got that little inkling, I would like to do this, or maybe at least try it. Just jump off that cliff and see what happens. And you're probably, if you're brave enough to jump off that cliff, you're probably going to fly. So I say just don't hold back. Just keep going.
Well, Nancy, thank you very much. What would be, if someone locally was interested in getting a hold of you, either to take a class or learn more about Inspire Yoga, how your company Inspire Yoga, N stands for Nancy, and how would they best get a hold of you?
The easiest way would be just to go to my website, which is rockfordyoga.com, or you could email nancy@rockfordyoga.com, and that's where you'll find me.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for being with us today. Thank you for joining us today as we heard Nancy share her story, going from, as I mentioned, this feisty farm girl to the city to being a mom and a housewife, and then as was she had an opportunity to change her life once again. She found not only yoga from an exercise standpoint, but from a lifestyle standpoint. Again, thank you for being with us today, and we'll see you next week.